renovations, restoration, alteration, or maintenance projects, and preferably we hear from you early on, so we're both working towards the same goal together. My director is responsible for the reports to the town's heritage panel and to council. If the permit application meets the criteria of the plan, 2 directors can sign that permit fairly quickly. If it's more complicated and maybe an exemption, the panel reviews the heritage alteration permit and makes a recommendation to council, who makes the final decision. Council is also responsible for adopting policies and plans related to heritage, and they set the budget. Lastly, the plan includes guidelines for advanced planning, reaction during disaster or conflict, and also post-disaster or post-conflict guidelines. So this chart shows what does and does not require a permit. The A, B, C, and D at the top, each building within the district was given a rank based on the attributes and the historical information. So if you're in the A, B, or C category, there's a bit more restrictions and more heritage permits required. If you're in the D category, there's a little bit more wiggle room for you before the permits are required. The Architectural Design Guidelines section states that the intent of the HCD is not to stop improvement. It's to preserve the defining features that define the character. Certain buildings represent their history and architectural heritage better than others and are classified accordingly, A, B, C, and D. Key elements include the building form, massing, height, width, visible depth, the building setting on the property, and the architectural style. Alterations, they do have the potential to dramatically affect not only the appearance of the building, but even the entire streetscape. So there are several recommended practices and design guidelines in the plan. Additions can have a major impact as well, so they should be complementary to the original building, but clearly identifiable as a new addition. We're not trying to fool anyone when we make an addition, but we do want it to still fit into the landscape. There are some locations in the HCD where new buildings are likely, and these buildings must be designed to be compatible with the heritage characteristics to help retain the overall visual context of the area. There are a significant number of commercial buildings in the HCD, most of which are purpose-built, and some that are converted from residential buildings. A number of them have been converted from single-family to multi-family units or offices, for example, which can help retain the building and make economic sense. But the required changes to the facade must be carefully planned in partnership. The site-specific guidelines refer to areas with a distinct set of circumstances related to future development and potential or character, and the case studies section gives several buildings in Perth along with both recommended and not recommended examples for change. This photo is of Coates Mill, just to demonstrate a building conversion. This was originally a felt mill or felt factory, and there was actually 5 buildings that have been amalgamated into one. It's now mixed use between restaurant, retail, office space. There's even a tattoo shop in there now. And the back of the building is an example of a site-specific case where there's potential room for expansion in that space, so there's been extra consideration given to that location. Regarding the landscape, the contrast between Perth's block grid street pattern and the organic forms of the Tay River are noteworthy. They reflect the town's military roots and the prosperity and development that followed. It's expected that the landscape will inevitably change, so including the landscape here is to preserve the key elements and the relationship between the landscape and the streetscape. The key elements include the composition of streets, lanes, slices, boulevards, parks, and open spaces, storefronts, trees, and gardens. They all contribute to. And with respect to commercial streetscapes, sidewalks, cafes, and patios are encouraged. Unified street furniture and lighting is encouraged, and unified paving materials are encouraged for pedestrian areas, for example. Stewart Park has a deed which has very specific restrictions tied to it, which are still followed today. In conjunction with that, the HCD recommended that mature vegetation be managed within the park, and that the original layout and design of the park be respected, and that defining features are restored and repaired as needed, and if our new features are ever considered, that they respect the heritage character. This section also includes guidelines for lighting, street furniture, gateways, parking lots, views, trees, easements, courtyards, plazas, signage, and more. I'm often asked about the difference between restoration and conservation. Restoration is more about repairs and rebuilding to bring something back to a former condition, where conservation is more about the ongoing efforts to preserve and maintain the building while still respecting its original condition. This section has a lot of advice surrounding protecting, stabilizing, maintaining, cleaning, modernizing, and more. And the guidelines go into each area of the building, such as roofs, chimneys, exterior walls, porches, paint, and more. Each section includes descriptions of the typical problems, as well as the related conservation and maintenance guidelines. This is an example of a project that was completed in the last few years. The photo on the left shows that there's some rot at the top and on the sides. The paint's all peeling at the bottom. There's some rot there as well, and there's also just a lot of thick layers of paint. And then the picture on the right shows what it looked like after treatment. So they were able to save this attribute. So some of the supporting projects and documents we've talked about already, but I thought I would show you some of the ones that we've worked on either in conjunction with the HCD or afterwards. This is the section of the website with the information about the district on it. The green button at the top links you to the full plan, and we put that front and center because we heard from realtors that they were making deals in the middle of the night and doing things off hours and just needed more access to the information. We've also added, I think under the first bullet, a spreadsheet that has all of the addresses listed in it, so you can find for sure if your building is designated or not. There's a grant section here. The grants are up to a maximum of $10,000 or 25% of the project, subject to availability. That's for heritage restoration. The resource section has a stewardship guide, which is a sort of a condensed version of the plan to help building and business owners understand their role as stewards of the building. The council gives out awards every year. Nominations are actually open right now. I think they just opened. For 4 different categories, buildings, landscapes, we've added heritage, craftsperson. I can't see that last one, but maybe you can on the screen. So the awards are given out each year. The last heritage craftsperson one was just added in 2021, I think, 2021 or 2022. But it's a new addition to make sure we're not only recognizing the building owner, but also the person doing the actual work. We give out an annual report to all the building and business owners within the district each year. This is an example of the most recent one. We include information about the panel, some highlights from the year, a summary of the heritage permits. I think you can see up there, it's around 285 that were given out since it was enacted in 2012 until this was published last year. And we highlighted the award winners here as well. We've got Linda, who's our heritage craftsperson. She was working on our gardens in town with the Horticultural Society. The Red Fox was recognized for the work that they did on the exterior of the building. And Vanessa was recognized for the work she was doing at Shaw's in District 54 as a stonemason. We've had a partnership with Algonquin College. I think this was in 2019. We shared the cost to hire students to work over one summer to kind of look at each property and make a facade recovery plan. So we had the work with the statements of significance. This was sort of the next step, recognizing that people do want to do work on their property, and we wanted to take a look at the history, make note of the attributes, and make some recommendations as to what would be a good suggestion if they were trying to make change. So as soon as people contact me to say they're thinking of doing work on their building, I take a look through these files and just see if something has been already done, because it helps us know what recommendations to make. And it's a good resource for the building owners because the information is already put together for them, so it's a bit more easily accessible to find out what is a good approach and what may not be. We've touched on some of the benefits already, but I thought I'd share some of the supporting, some of the items again. We've got protection and management of heritage assets. I think for the building owners and for residents and for the town, that's a big one. We know we've got a plan in place instead of trying to scramble and answer questions for each building all the time. We've got a blanket protection in place that really helps everyone know where we're at and what is and isn't allowed. The information and guidance when planning, undertaking restorations, renovations, and redevelopment, that's huge for business owners and building owners to know what can and can't happen more upfront. There's potential financial assistance through the grants. Depending on where they're located, they're eligible for the Heritage Restoration Grant as well as the Community Improvement Plan. It's a new source for tourism initiatives such as walking tours, and it gives increased community stability. I would just add personally a few other benefits that I think are related. The consistent look and feel, knowing that that will last in Perth. Perth is known for its heritage, so to know that those buildings will stay hopefully in good shape for a long time is a big benefit. I think it fosters a marketable streetscape that residents, building, and business owners can take pride in. It gives a clear set of guidelines that cover nearly every scenario and streamlines things for everyone as well. And it's also transparent guidance for guiding decision-making processes. If people have questions for us, we can refer them to the plan, and all the information is there. So, it takes personal opinions out of it and just helps us make sure we're covered and everyone understands where we're coming from. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you. That's excellent. I was just going to ask that the divisions you created, were there A, B, C, or
there was A, B, C, and D.
How did you form which is which?
I think it has to do with, you remember me saying that 90% fit the criteria, so 10% didn't. So those 10% would be more in the D category. They're in the area, they still have a blanket protection, but if they want to change their windows and doors, it's not as important, I guess, that they choose something original because they may not have been original to begin with. Yeah, and then the A category are sort of the bigger, like we have National Historic Sites, for example, in the district. So, and then B and C were kind of in the middle. Still important, still old buildings, but a little more flexibility.
And if someone invests in the building, that's C.
No one's ever asked me that, but I don't think so, because I think it has more to do with the heritage attributes rather than the condition. So I don't think so. But it might be a case-by-case thing that I have to look at. Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I also was very impressed with the deep character. First of all, I'm impressed with the fact that people operating property.
I should have looked at the amount. I think it's around 30,000, but I'm not positive. It's in the budget line, and it's. I think it's been a quite popular program. For example, the money has been spent this year already. There's none left for the rest of the year, so people are taking advantage of it, and it has to go more towards the front facade. It's not just anything. I don't think I mentioned it, but the plan it doesn't take into consideration anything on the interior. It's only sort of public-facing streetscape side. Even the back of the building is not really a concern unless maybe if it's backing onto public parking lots or something like that, but it's really more about the facade. So it is, we heard from the business owners at the beginning that was an incentive for them if they could get help paying for things, because I know sometimes people hear designation, they think, oh, it sounds expensive. So having a little bit of support from council that way has been great.
My second question relates to private residence. We're not allowed to come to the lake. Anything to do with any water, so it won't designated or not. Again, sure. How does the organize residence? There's no program that defines how to do it. Are you running from the owner? Insurance policy normally say that as long as they sort of that policy, yeah. How does feedback cause
I haven't personally received that feedback, but that could be going to my director rather than myself. But I haven't personally received that. Lori, do you have a comment on that?
When we bought the house, we were on the public safety, and we are, because we've got out of the specifications of the place, to deal with probably large students. When we take time to insure it, we had a thorough inspection and build the insurance requirements that went out into the electric capital. And then the insurance regulations, insuring that would be consistent, and it wasn't necessary.
Yes.
So, I noticed there was a bylaw 4271 that's to create the Heritage Conservation District. The number's not important.
Okay, yeah, I don't think that would hurt me, but.
So that would have been, that bylaw would be written by the heritage planner or town planner in Perth, right?
On the page with the website, that green button, that links to the bylaw. So the bylaw is a couple of pages with the report attached to it.
Right, but it wouldn't be written by a volunteer on the municipal heritage committee. It'd be written by a professional of the town, right?
I would think so. So I should also clarify, this was in 2012. I started in 2018. so I'm not exactly sure who wrote it, but I would think it would be a town staff member.
Okay, thanks. But it was a bylaw that creates the HCD, right?
Yes.
In Beckwood Township, the council based recommendation to create the bylaw with input from the heritage community. So that, I told, we basically wrote it, and they just wrote back with it into a minor word or two change. And I think that's the way it should be, and we need to push it.
Yeah, in our case, the Heritage Panel was involved. They were definitely involved at the time, but I just can't say exactly who was responsible for what, just because it was before my time.
What you did in a situation where there was a modern structure within the heritage conservation district boundary that really didn't fit with the appearance that you were looking for and the preservation that you were looking for. Were you able to, you decided to lengthen to change that situation, or speak to the, did you try to talk with the owners?
Like exempt a building from the boundaries, or?
No, I was just thinking if a building was already there, it was modern, it was not interesting with the appearance that you were trying to promote in heritage conservation, what you were able to do to bring that in line with, or did you use it as is, or how did you handle that?
I think you more respect it as is. Like, for example, the TD Bank in Perth is not an original compared to the timeline of the other buildings. It was done, I think, in the 70s, but it's still within the district. It still has the same blanket coverage. I would have to check if it was labeled a B, C, or D. I'm not positive, actually. But I don't think there's any talk of excluding buildings at the beginning. It was more to do with the outer boundary. Once you were in it, I think you were just in it.
Yeah, I'm not really talking about it completely, right? It's more saying, what do you do with, I don't want to call it a problem building, but if it doesn't really fit with the style of the heritage you're looking for.
And it existed before
Yeah.
before 2012.
So, what do you do about like a building like that? Do you do that and just that's just stay out there with what it is, or do you try to encourage them to do some sort of
And we're not, I don't think we're actively going out to people to encourage them to make changes. It's more being a resource for when the building owner wants to make changes. So I think we'd have to have that discussion once the building owner was interested. I don't think we would be going out to say, can you make your building more like this? I don't see that happening. It'd be more if they were starting to think about their facade, they would probably come to us and we would take a look if they were to see if they were A, B, C, or D. They might be a D, just based on what you're mentioning. So the signage would have to get a heritage permit and it would also have to get a sign permit. I'm not as familiar with the sign permit side, but the heritage side means it should be like a wood or wood-like. It should have raised lettering ideally, gooseneck lighting rather than backlit lighting. So there are criteria like that that fits the whole downtown. There would be I don't think there'd be an exemption for a newer business to have newer signage. If it was in place before 2012, we didn't make them go back and change it. It would be more to change it once they were ready to make a new sign.
They just add to the modern building movement. In a lot of HC, when we are going through this process, we have this big property inventory, and you're trying to establish what's the appropriate boundary. And within that, you have many buildings that are contributing to the character of the place, and other ones that are not contributing. So these guidelines that are put in place, or the society guidelines, are really attributed to the contributing building, and aren't really necessarily applicable to the non-contributing. I would say maybe the only exception to that is if there's a major like exterior renovation that would have a direct visual impact on the adjacent property, then you have to consider that. But no, there shouldn't be any direct pressure on an existing water solid.
It is covered. I don't have it memorized, so I can't tell you exactly what it says. But I know that the signs, for example, that like the backlit line signs are permitted in the downtown. They'd have to be, but they can be lit with like more of a gooseneck style lighting that shines light on the sign versus being backlit. And the street, I know that having consistent like street furniture and lighting is part of the plan as well. And we have more of the old-fashioned black-looking lights downstairs. Downtown. So it is covered, but I couldn't tell you the specifics without having a look myself. Yes.
Have you had a lot of cases of conflict with the property owner when they come in for an application to alter, where you had to refuse an application, or you know, kind of hit loggerhead the project was really kind of stalled and issue a heritage permit?
The biggest conflict sometimes is time for people because if it fits the criteria, we can turn the heritage permits around in a day or two. If it doesn't fit the criteria, they can either redesign their plans to meet the criteria or apply to the heritage panel and council for an exemption. So if someone applies for an exemption, it would go to the heritage panel. They would make a recommendation. My director would make a separate recommendation as well, which is often in line with the council, with the committee's recommendation, but may not be. And then council would have to decide. So if that's the case, the biggest conflict would be that they would have to wait, 2 months or so to get a final decision, which not everyone is thrilled about. But if it does meet the criteria, then it can be turned around fairly quickly. I don't think we've had we've had a case that there's been no possible compromise, not that I'm aware of. The only one that kind of made the news was the paint color at the time, which I'll let you Google that afterwards. But generally, a building owner or business owner wanted to do more painting if the colors didn't align with the plan at the time. But we did amend the plan so that the colors were not a concern anymore. It was more about painting something that hadn't been painted before is still an issue, but as long as it's been painted before, it's no issue. And the only way we do have anything to do with color is if someone's applying for a grant, we ask that the colors be within the Vision More historical collection, I think it's called. But if they're not applying for a grant, any color is doable.
How's the staff time on all of this? Like, is it constant staff time to manage all of this?
Yes and no. I wouldn't say